In the story I'm about to tell you, I'm not the brave one. The brave ones are the children, women and men who spoke up about abuse at the hands of aid workers. People who trusted me to do everything I could to hold their abusers to account. They should be the ones here before you today. They should be given a platform to tell you how aid workers forced them to have sex in exchange for the help they desperately needed. Instead, they're living with the legacy of abuse. Abuse that we know has been going on for decades. Abuse we know is still going on despite the fine words of the aid sector. When Oxfam hit the headlines, it was a shock to many that Oxfam staff were paying earthquake survivors in Haiti, women who needed money to feed their babies, to have sex. But this wasn't news. The aid sector had known for years that it had a problem. It also knew the problem was worse than was being reported, that this wasn't a one-off, and it went beyond sexual exploitation. In 2002, allegations were first reported that 67 children in Western Africa had been sexually abused by aid workers, that aid workers had forced children to have sex in exchange for food. What happened? The first response? An attempt to discredit the report. Next, many fine words. A task force was established, a resolution passed by the UN, but what fundamentally changed? 10 years later, I was appointed head of safeguarding at Oxfam GB. My role was funded 3 days a week. I was a team of one in an organisation of 4,500 people working across 90 countries. I knew there'd been a problem in Haiti. I knew there was a concern about underreporting. I had no idea how widespread or serious the issue was. On my first country visit, I held a training session with staff and gave out a confidential survey, asking people if they'd witnessed sexual exploitation or abuse perpetrated by Oxfam staff. I remember sitting in my hotel room that night, unfolding the paper responses. I felt cold with shock as I read one response after another, all the same story. Of women on field trips having to fight men off when they answered a knock on their hotel door. Of promotions being made conditional on sex. Of the feelings of shame and self-blame. And this was just the Oxfam staff. As this was happening in Oxfam's offices, what was happening in the field? In refugee camps where Oxfam workers were being sent to help. The more surveys I conducted, the more evidence I collated of systemic abuse across multiple country programmes. Furthermore, I was identifying problems in our charity shops here in the UK, of shop managers not being DBS checked and left alone with child volunteers, of allegations being made that their mentor had to involve the police. At every opportunity, I was flagging to senior management the seriousness of the problem. Their response? By 2014, I was funded 4 days a week with a part-time administrator. By the end of 2014, matters came to a head. I was due to speak with the CEO after a particularly damning survey where in one location, 7% were saying they'd witnessed or experienced rape or attempted rape perpetrated by Oxfam workers. An hour before the meeting, I was told I was no longer needed. And when I emailed the CEO and asked why, he replied, and I quote, "You are right, this is a serious issue. Leadership team recognised this, but felt there was nothing as a group that we could actually add to the situation." Quite. In January 2015, I walked out after receiving the third allegation in 2 months of child abuse in Oxfam's shops. I went to the trustees. I begged for more resource to tackle the scale of the problem the charity was facing. Their answer? A promise to conduct a strategic review, a promise they never actually acted on. By March 2015, I'd left Oxfam and by June 2015, I'd reported them to the charity regulator. What happened next? It was swept under the carpet by the Charity Commission. That was at that time far too close to the charities it was meant to regulate. I wasn't interviewed. I wasn't asked a single question. Despite the seriousness of the matter, it was treated as a low-level operational case, and life went on. I took the matter to my MP. He wrote on my behalf to government. Again, nothing other than a justification for why charity shops should be exempted from DBS checks. For the next few years, the injustice of what was happening to Oxfam consumed me. It was all I could think about day and night. For months, I couldn't work, and the toll on my family was enormous. Then, in 2017, a brave woman and former Oxfam worker, Leslie Argams, spoke to The Times about being sexually assaulted by her manager, who she reported, and then he was allowed to dismiss her. I went back to the Charity Commission, and this time, now the media were involved, they listened. And by that time, the Haiti scandal broke in February 2018, and an investigation was already underway. With thanks to the investigative journalism of Sean O'Neill at The Times and the bravery of his sources, the lid was finally lifted, and the reports came flooding in from many other aid agencies. A government inquiry was started, and in June last year, it concluded that the aid sector had been complacent, bordering on complicit. In July this year, the Charity Commission completed its investigations and published a critical report, finding that there'd been a culture of tolerating poor behaviour and mismanagement at Oxfam. So what happens next? As in 2002, there have been many fine words. Hotlines opened, new positions created, but have things fundamentally changed? Has there really been a seismic shift away from the decades of abuse? Things are changing. There are glimmers of hope. Charities are now acknowledging the problem, as evidenced by 1,000 more serious incident reports to the Charity Commission in 2018, but abuse is still taking place. In July this year, Oxfam's own independent commission visited 3 research sites and found that sexual exploitation and abuse were pervasive in 2 of those 3 research sites. Focus group participants told the research team, and I quote, "Those who do not agree to sexual exploitation suffer penalties, including withholding humanitarian assistance, termination of employment, and withholding payment for work." Abuse is also taking place here in the UK. Only last month, a woman approached me to share her story. She was working for an international charity in the UK when she was assaulted by her manager. She was left with bruises across her body and in need of medical attention. She reported the matter to both the police and to the charity. What happened next? They invited her to a disciplinary meeting to account for her actions in the hours precipitating the assault. They blamed her and they shamed her. And behind me are her words, the words of the woman whose story I just shared, of this brave woman who is speaking up and is fighting her case, who should not have to fight her case. This happened last month, this happened here in the UK, and this has to stop. I know, as I share this story, that others in this room will have their own stories, will have faced disbelief when they should have been believed, will have been blamed when it was not their fault. Back in 2012, I was like many of you. Nice job, recently married, new home in Oxford, and looking forward to a long-term career in the aid sector. Now, I no longer work in the aid sector. I'm separated from my husband, and following the backlash against me for speaking out, I no longer live in Oxford. I didn't speak out because I was brave. I spoke out because others were brave and trusted me to speak out for them. And my question to you, will you do the same when your turn comes? And as it says here, courage, dear heart. Thank you.